start some more podcast with you, Dr. Garlock.
Hey,
It's always an honor to be here.
the pleasure is all mine. I love doing this, and I enjoy working with Dr. Willingham as he and I work together to share some of the things that he and I have done in the past and how our training and our field of study and teaching is so much the same. And there are several things that I want to mention about today and what we're doing.
Yeah.
Because two of the hymns we're going to mention are old. In fact, they were done in the 1800s, and it's hard to realize that they're probably done almost 400 years ago, at least 350 years ago. And they had the same ideas that we had. And I need to mention today, for choir directors, men who direct the congregational singing, there's a reason they wrote the songs in 4/4 time. They intended to be 4 counts in every measure. Don't do it as if it were 2/2 time.
Yeah.
Don't try to do it in 2. And somebody has gotten the idea that everything should be fast. And they think that fast and energy are the same thing. They are not. It can be energetic and full of life and still be slow. And these men deliberately put it in 4/4. They don't want it to be done, bump, go by so fast you can't catch the words.
Right.
And that's as my wife used to say, and I want to say something about my wife too. But
Good.
well, I used to say, she'd tell people, in talking about me, she'd say, he's a born teacher. And Dr. Willingham,
true.
I believe you are too.
Thank you.
And I'm watching you work, and is the same way I used to do with my students. I went into the details, and I said, I should be able to explain this to you. And this is what we're trying to do in our podcasts.
Right.
We're trying to explain. Now, we have to use some technical terms.
Sure.
But we do want to explain.
Right.
Because choir directors need to know what we're talking about. Congregational singers need to know this. And if you're just in a choir, you need to know, too, that when a line crescendos, give it the crescendo. Don't ignore it. And we're going to be talking about all those things.
Good.
And that's exciting, even to talk about it.
Excellent.
So let's get into the first song this morning. First hymn, I should say.
Yes.
When Morning Gilds the Skies.
Yes.
It came from a Kirchliches Gesangbuch, I guess, with Würzburg. I can't even say the German right.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
In 1828. And the music was written by Joseph Barnby. He lived from 1838 to 1896. It's interesting, a lot of these men who were good musicians only lived into their 40s or 50s.
Yeah, sad.
And God's let me live a long time.
Oh, yes.
That's amazing. But here we have a beautiful song, and we want to talk about it. The words were written by Edward Caswell. He lived from 1814 to 1878, or at least it was translated. It came from the German. He was one of those hypocritical men that we are seeing today, who originally say they believe the truth of the Word of God. However, they later turn away from the truth and accept false teaching,
that's sad.
even denying what they said they have believed. This reveals what Solomon, in his book of Man Under the Sun, that's Solomon's book of Ecclesiastes, believes that everything is empty and leads to frustration. That's what he said. He says, there is no new thing under the sun. Even in his worldview, Solomon realized that there's a holy God who will someday bring everything into judgment. However, Caswell's translation is still a good one.
Yes.
And Joseph Barnby, the musician, he was a proficient musician, must have recognized the intrinsic value of the lyrics. Barnaby was an accomplished and popular choral director in England in 1868 when he wrote this. He did a masterful setting of these words to music that paints appropriate pictures of what the original German text portrayed. So he was going back further. The text itself is a compilation of several scriptural texts. Psalm 34:1, blessed is he whose transgression is forgiven. Revelation 5, thou art worthy, O Lord, to receive glory and honor and praise. Psalm 19:1, the heavens declare the glory of God. Or Hebrews 13:15, by him, therefore, let us offer the sacrifice of praise to God continually. Or let's take Psalm 145:3, to be more exact. Great is the Lord and greatly to be praised. Having said that, let's look at what Barnaby did to color those words and make them stick in our minds. That's what we're talking about here. How the music portrays. The first two archetypes are amazingly effective. Do we need to go back over archetypes and explain what they are?
Yes, it'd be good to remind.
I think so. Why don't you do that for us?
So an archetype is something that you'll see consistently. For example, here in the first line of music, you see how the melody line ascends, and that you would naturally want to crescendo as the line gets higher. And then as it comes back down lower, you naturally want to get softer. So sometimes it's built in the line there. Sometimes there's leaps of, especially a sixth, emphasizes important words. There's 20 or so that you found as you've been studying these.
Right.
So that's the idea of there's something in the music that specifically conveys, almost like phonics in written language, it conveys meaning.
That's why we call this phonology.
Exactly.
It's musical phonics. And I want to mention here, Tim, that how much I appreciate you, because you explain things so well, and I hope people who are listening, I hope choir directors are listening, or even choral people are working with a congregation. Your explanations show them what they need to be doing. And so the first two archetypes are in measures 1 and 2, as you already mentioned. They're dealing with mourning, and they're trying to paint mourning. I remember who was it? I'm trying to think of the man who, in his music, remember the book we looked at by Mosseri was the guy's name, and he said he wanted to paint a sunrise, and he had the strings in the orchestra rising to paint this. And that's what this Barnaby was doing in this song, just by the way he wrote this, the soprano and bass moving up in tenths. That is also repeated in measures 7 and 8 for the text in all 4 stanzas. By the way, isn't it interesting? Oh, so often it fits all 4 stanzas. And by the way, they're not verses, they're stanzas.
Right.
A verse is one line of a stanza.
Exactly.
A stanza is different. That is followed by contrary motion between the same 2 voices to paint awakening in the heart. But it's so interesting how he wanted to paint the words. Then the motion on skies and cries highlights both of those words in measures 2 and 4. Notice he added something extra to highlight those words.
Right.
Then measures 5 through 10 are a musical genius at work. The melody in the soprano is basically the same, but it's varied. Every 2 measures, it's varied. It's so interesting. In addition to that, the harmony is to vary the movement each time. The melody uses the same varied notes. That is amazing. Meanwhile, the theme, May Jesus Christ, goes temporarily into the key of G major with prayer and repair. Like you call that a secondary dominant, which it really is. He goes temporarily into that key, having moving lines to emphasize them. However, the last, May Jesus Christ be praised, measures 11 through 13, implies the same basic motive of the previous measures in half notes with one note to D in the melody. In addition to that, Barnaby places a 1/7 flat 7 in third inversion. Do we need to explain that?
Yes.
Go ahead.
On Jesus, it's that movement there in the bass, that B flat moving to the A. The sus of Jesus is that 1/7 flat 7. I like to think of it as a 5/7. When I hear that major minor 7th chord sound, most of the time it's going to resolve as if it's the 5 chord of the key, but in this case it's a temporary 5 chord going to that 4 chord, really strengthening that push into that final cadence.
Isn't it amazing that Barnaby, Barnaby, that's
Barnaby, yes.
In fact, even the computer doesn't want to recognize his name, Barnaby, but that was his name, that he enclosed all of that in just these few measures.
Right. It's a lot
and then
going
when
on.
he gets to after that third inversion, then he puts in all those half notes for the theme and makes the thing go. What ordinarily would have been just 12 measures, it becomes 13 measures. And that's where he included, he wanted to draw it out by using half notes. And then right before the end, he puts in the tenor, he puts a dotted half note and a quarter note after the other notes coming on three. The tenor comes in to make it even more strong. May Jesus Christ be praised. To emphasize that word. Amazing. And I have to notice there's Hebrew parallelism that we have mentioned so often. It's obvious in both the text and the music. Barnaby put the parallelism in the music.
In the music, good.
And it was in the text, and the meter is 66666. 6 sixes. Isn't that interesting? That is why it's also noteworthy to describe the extension of measures 11 through 13 by Joseph Barnaby. Only a skillful composer could utilize the music to accomplish that, including the tenor voice having that extra rhythm.
Good.
That's amazing.
There was something you mentioned there that I think we should point out. You mentioned the meter and then all those sixes. So a lot of times we just think of the meter as the 4/4 of the music, but there's also a meter in the poetry.
Exactly.
And that's how many syllables you have in each of the verses. Remembering a verse is a phrase, and then the stanza is the whole thing. So as you break apart the verses in a hymn like this, there'll be a certain number of syllables for each of those verses. When, morning, gilds the skies. 6. And then go on the next phrase. There's 6 syllables there, 6
again,
syllables.
yes.
Yeah. So that's the meter in the lyric, which is a bit different than the meter of the music. Just
Okay, let me mention
that.
one thing interesting about that if you have any of our hymn books, Majesty hymns, Rejoice hymns, even Hymnos Majestrosos,
Yes.
there's an index of those meters. So you can check out the meters and look at the tune, what it was called and why it was called, and then you can check out the meter, which is very interesting. And I'm glad you mentioned that.
Yes.
Then I wondered, in closing this,
Certainly.
mention some anonymous quotes about this hymn,
Good.
When Morning Gilds the Skies. Because, by the way, it's a beautiful hymn.
Oh, yes.
I loved it so much. And the other hymn we're going to mention today, I said for my trombone choir, and then when I was just in my 30s, just starting to make arrangements. And I used it for my trombone choir, which I had about 13 trombones at that time. And we did When Morning Gilds the Skies, and the other one we're going to mention, Eternal Father Strong to Say. I still love those. By the way, when we get the Eternal Father Strong to Say, I'm going to tell how we performed that.
Oh, good.
But I just want to give a couple of quotes here about this hymn. Number one, the images of the risen sun carry over the second stanza as the night becomes day and the powers of darkness fear. Stanzas 3 and 4 switch from visual to oral praising of Christ. Then another quote was, when mirth for music longs, this is my song of songs. When morning gilds the skies.
Good.
And then another one I thought was great. When evening shadows fall, this rings my curfew call. May Jesus Christ be praised. And then one last one. It said, another person said, God's holy house of prayer has none that can compare to this hymn.
Good.
So what a great hymn this is.
Yes.
And when you sing it in your church, put it in the 4/4 time, draw it out, get the meaning of the words, don't let it go by so quickly.
Good.
The writing in the original German was good, the translation is good, and the music makes it stick in your mind for you to remember.
Excellent.